US President Donald Trump is getting even more angry with Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. Trump's team is failing to reach a full ceasefire deal in Ukraine before Easter. Meanwhile, the US has launched a global trade war against all countries around the globe. So why is Donald Trump getting more irritated by Vladimir Putin, and what does US trade war mean for the global economy? US President Donald Trump said he wants to see Russian dictator Putin to make a deal to end the war in Ukraine, again saying he would impose secondary tariffs on Russian oil if necessary. The head of the White House noted that he wants Putin to make the deal so that we stop the killing of Russian soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers and other people. Quote, "I want to make sure that he sees through it, and I think he will. I don't want to go to secondary tariffs on his oil, but I think, that's what I would do if I saw he wasn't doing his job. I did it with Venezuela." Trump also reiterated his disappointment with Ukraine over the rare earth deal, saying Kyiv was refusing to abide by the agreed upon terms. However, it is a lie, as President Zelensky is ready to sign a deal, but on appropriate for Ukraine terms. At the same time, senior Trump's administration officials have begun to acknowledge in recent days that the United States may not reach a peace deal on Ukraine in the next few months, according to Reuters. Trump's officials are developing new plans to pressure both Kyiv and Moscow. Trump and his advisors had set a goal of achieving a full ceasefire by April or May, and they hope to conclude a long-term peace agreement in the upcoming months. But none of these agreements look close. For the first time, Trump's officials have become increasingly disappointed in Russia. In a series of meetings and calls over the weekend, White House and State Department officials acknowledged that Putin is actively resisting efforts to broker a lasting peace deal. They discussed what economic or diplomatic sanctions, if any, could push Russia to make a deal. The growing anger toward Russia, including from President Trump, marks a shift in the administration's internal debate about Russia's willingness to negotiate. Trump has said for weeks that he trusts the Russian dictator and that he believes Putin is committed to peace, but in recent days the White House has grown wary of Putin's intentions. However, Trump continues to publicly demonstrate his belief that Putin would like to end the war. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's inner circle is advising him not to talk to Vladimir Putin until he commits to a full ceasefire in Ukraine, according to NBC News. Telephone conversation between Trump and Putin has not been planned. However, administration official warns that Trump may suddenly decide to talk to Putin. At the same time, they noted that the United States president was advised not to call Putin until he gives the White House his green light to a full ceasefire in the war. On Sunday, Trump told NBC News that he plans to talk to Putin in the recent week. He also said that he was very angry with Putin for his statements about a transitional government in Ukraine and threatened to impose large-scale secondary tariffs on Russian oil. At the same time, US Senators Richard Blumenthal and Lindsey Graham, led by 50 of their colleagues, have introduced primary and secondary sanctions against Russia and actors supporting Russia's aggression in Ukraine. These sanctions would be imposed if Russia refuses to engage in good faith negotiations for a lasting peace with Ukraine or initiates another effort, including military invasion deep inside Ukraine that undermines the sovereignty of Ukraine. The legislation also imposed a 500% tariff on imported goods from countries that buy Russian oil, gas, uranium, and other products. Quote, "We are pleased to announce that we have received overwhelming bipartisan support for our primary and secondary sanctions legislation against Russia. The sanctions against Russia require tariffs on countries who purchase Russian oil, gas, uranium, and other products. They are hard-hitting for a reason. Senators say that the dominating view in the United States is that Russia is the aggressor, and that this horrific war and Putin's aggression must end now and be deterred in the future." Also, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, American General Christopher Cavoli has provided his assessment of the state of the war in Ukraine. He does not believe that Ukraine is doomed to lose the war. In response to question of whether Ukrainians are doomed to defeat, he replied no. Quote, "There is nothing inevitable in the war, and the Ukrainians are now in very strong defensive positions and are slowly improving their ability to generate force." At the same time, he admitted that now it is difficult to imagine a large Ukrainian offensive that would clear every square inch of Ukrainian territory. Quote, "But it is equally difficult to imagine that Ukraine will collapse and lose this conflict. I do not think that Ukrainian defeat is inevitable." Cavoli is convinced. He also agreed that the Ukrainian army has evolved from a soldier with a rifle to a truly serious modern military force. Moreover, the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Cavoli, believes that Ukraine has managed to solve some problems with the lack of people on the front line. He said this during hearing in the US Senate Armed Forces Committee. The general noted that the Russians seem to be suffering from a lack of armored vehicles and manpower. According to his view, Ukrainians have taken very strong defensive positions, dug in well, and seem to have solved some of their problems with personnel. Cavoli has confirmed that Ukraine has increased the number of people available for mobilization, increased the number of people available for voluntary enlistment, and did a good job of moving people from headquarters to the front lines. Meanwhile, the US president has officially declared a start of a trade war simultaneously with all the countries of the world, introducing tariffs from 10 to 50% of imports to the United States, depending on the country of origin. At the gathering, which was called "Let's Make America Rich Again," Donald Trump called the April 2nd American Liberation Day and emphasized that he seeks to protect America. Trump introduced decree a national emergency due to the U.S. foreign trade deficit. To address this deficit, the U.S. is imposing tariffs on all imports with a minimum base of 10% to 20%, and moreover, countries with which the U.S. has a key deficit receive a higher tariff. However, according to BBC, economists say many companies are likely to pass the increased cost of imported goods onto their customers. In the U.S., they could also reduce imports, meaning fewer products are available, putting pressure on prices, rising prices for Americans. To rise the revenue, Trump is hoping for U.S. consumers are going to have to swallow rises and keep on buying items made in other countries in similar quantities. World leaders have been reacting to Trump's announcement of the global trade war, as BBC reports. European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen said, quote, "The consequences will be dire for millions of people around the world. EU countries are finalizing a response to the 25% steel and aluminum tariffs and could announce further measures. China has promised resolute countermeasures, which are likely to hurt US companies trying to sell into the huge Chinese market." UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said the economy will be hurt by the latest tariffs, but promised to react with cool and calm heads. Business UK Secretary Jonathan Reynolds told MPs that the government would look at how retaliatory tariffs measures against US products could affect British firms. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney said the country will retaliate against US tariffs with purpose and with force to protect workers and strengthen the economy. That's all for today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and glory to Ukraine!